And welcome to episode 11 of Beyond the Finish Line with Joe Harden of the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network. Today we have none other than Jennifer Goins. I was captivated by Jennifer's story while watching her complete the Cocodona 250 this year through the daily updates on the Team Becoming Ultra Facebook page that her husband was keeping updated. And I was also really inspired by her story, and I knew I had to get Jennifer on the pod someday. And then I heard her on Chris and Carly's podcast, becoming my first Ultra Pod. And then I just really loved her story so much. And I'm so stoked to have this chance to chat with Jennifer and get to know her. And also, please feel free to submit comments and questions for Jennifer during the pod, and we'll get through those throughout the episode. And also, if you're digging the pod, please head to the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network, wherever you get your podcasts. Please rate, subscribe, review, share the pod. We can't do this without your support, and we appreciate it. And there's an excellent community of other podcasters on there. There's 7 different excellent shows on there with fantastic content coming out almost every single day, every single week. So without further ado, let's bring Jennifer forward for this great chat. Hello.
Hey, Joe.
Okay. One of these days I'll get that intro right. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on. And it's been awesome. It was really awesome seeing your story live on Facebook. Your husband, David, was updating it, and I was glued to it. I know there was a bunch of us on Team BU that were watching it. And then I heard you on Chris and Carly's podcast. They're the greatest. So I knew I had to have you on the podcast. So I say we just jump in the deep end of this. And who is Jennifer Goins?
Well,
right, big question, right?
I know, right? It's one of those things, right? You never think of like answering that question like in the third person. But I'm a wife and mother. Like obviously, you talked about how like my husband was sharing all the details. I think being a wife is one of like my greatest gifts. Like my husband's one of my biggest supporters, and we really do enjoy supporting each other in this adventure. That's how we met Chris and Carly. Like my husband Dave and I were both on season 10 of the Becoming Ultra podcast together. We were their first couple. I'm a mom. My husband and I share 7 kids between the two of us. We have a wonderful blended family. And then we have now we're up to, we've got 5 grandkids. So we just added a new one to the mix. So it's just a ton of fun. I also work a full-time job. So I'm just kind of like, you, right? Working a full-time job, doing crazy things and going on adventures.
That's amazing. Yeah, you certainly sounds like you wear a lot of hats. That's a big family too, but that's a ton of fun actually. But I'm a father too. I've got 2, not quite as big, but it's one of my favorite things I do. It's one of the best gifts, right? Just like you said. So if you wouldn't mind, can we kind of go through, I want to talk about running first, I guess, for a little bit. Let's talk about your running journey. Like, where did this all start? I mean, I know I touched on Cocodona 250, but obviously that, that story goes much deeper than just Cocodona. And maybe run us through like where your running journey began.
So I discovered running in late 2017 I was traveling a ton for work. Typically I was getting off the plane and we were going to my husband and I would go to a local brewery, and the owner of the local brewery was training for her first marathon. And so just joking around one day, she was training for a Disney marathon, and I was like, I should come with you. And like, she invited me to come along. I watched her cross the finish line that January, and I was like instantly just hooked. And so I ran my first 5K literally early in January of 2018, and then just kind of, just got hooked on it, right? Like I wanted all of like the shiny little medals, like every weekend was a new race, and kind of did that for probably a couple of years. Like I ran my first half marathon later on that year, and then just kind of kept running. Early in 2021, I ran my first marathon, and that was really where like the chaos of all of this fun is kind of transpired. So like 2021 ran my first marathon, downhill road race, Mount Lemmon down in southern Tucson, which is just an absolutely like our favorite spot to go and kind of take a day trip. And then just my husband discovered the Becoming Ultra podcast, and that's where we decided to run our first ultra. Ran that first ultra in October of 2021, the day after our 10-year wedding anniversary. The following month ran a 50 miler, which we crossed hand in hand over the finish line 8 minutes before the cutoff, and found out that I had fractured my foot that race. While still in a boot in January, signed up for my first 100 miler and ran Javelina that following October. Just after Javelina, decided, okay, that was fun. Didn't die. What's next? I had always that was when like the whole Cocodona like big thing had been happening. I live in Arizona, and so I was like, oh, I want to do that. And that was the first year that they announced the Sedona Canyons 125. So I sent a message to my coach and was like, hey, what do you think? And she was like, well, as long as you're going to run Cocodona, go ahead and sign up. So following year, I ran 125. And then this year, here I am. I completed the Cocodona 250 in May of this year. So it's been a wild, very fast ride. But it's been fun. It's been one of those things where I've literally looked at every race and was like, okay, that was hard, but didn't die. What's next? That's been the way that my journey has gone. Fortunately, like I hit May and finished Cocodona, and it was like, okay, time for a little bit of a break.
I love that. I kind of follow the same path. It's just like, well, like it didn't quite kill me. It's just like, and I'll do the same thing. It's like I'm still like, I still have my feet propped from an ultra, and I'm just like okay. So that's so cool. That's so rad that you just basically from 2021 to 2024. You went from no ultra to Cocodona. That's
yep.
Right. Yeah, that's wild. That's so cool.
It is really crazy when you think of that progression.
Yeah, it's wild. That's wild. It's awesome though. So you started off with road races, you said, right? Like, you just like fell into trail running, or like, I guess when did that come about? You're just like, oh wow, like I should sign up for a trail race. Did that just kind of happen organically, or did you do what actually led you to make that decision?
I think it was really my husband. Like I'd finished my first marathon. I kind of self-coached him to running. He decided to run his first marathon that year. He had an even shorter running history than I. He just decided to kind of start joining me on a fitness journey that he was having. And he was the one that kind of stumbled on the whole ultra thing. Like I didn't even know that it existed, and he stumbled on Becoming Ultra. And for those that, are listening to the podcast that don't know what that is, basically Scott Jones, the founder of Becoming Ultra, like he has basically the principle is they have coaches. They train everyday runners, just like, people that are on like this, community to train for their first ultra. So you have, people that are in school, they're working people, they're, just the everyday kind of person, and they train them to run their first ultra. And through that, they kind of share their journey on a podcast every couple of weeks. And so my husband found it, so I blame him. But it's been such a blessing. Like, I think looking back, like I wish I would have found the trail community beforehand. I think the greatest gift my life has had is having this trail community behind me. There are so many amazing people out there. And I think that's what kind of has always propelled me to like, hey, what's next? Because you always have 1,000 people in your corner, and strangers out on the trail when you're struggling. It's like, hey, are you okay? Can I help you? And it's such a welcoming and embodied community that I think that's kind of what keeps you coming back and wanting to strive for more.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think that's what keeps me going too. Is like the distance is like cool, right? It's like, all right, but like what really keeps me going and like striving is the people. Like, totally agree. I wish we would have found it sooner. I'm glad I found it when I did, I guess. But same thing. It's like I never really felt like I fit in anywhere, and the trail running community has given me, a home for misfit toys. So yeah, I love that. Yeah, and shout out to Scott. Becoming Ultra is like I'm a proud member of the page. I didn't go through like any of the seasons, but I was nice. Chris was nice enough to invite me, and I've always loved the page, and that's how I found your story and my first ultra pod, like I said. So, if anybody wants to check it out, I highly recommend it. Great podcast, great page. So, all right, we have to talk Cocodona because like we mentioned in the green room, I would love to do a 200 miler. So I was kind of living vicariously through the Facebook updates. Your husband was sharing your husband's post. Like, I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. So let's talk Cocodona. Like, run us through all of it, the ups and downs, the leading up to it, how it went. Like, I want to hear all these deets on Cocodona this year. It was pretty awesome.
Well, I'm glad you loved following along. I think I went back after the fact and read everything that he said, and it was just amazing to see all the love and the support that was out there that was kind of following along on that journey. For me, like the Cocodona journey kind of started like 2 years before, just watching the live stream. Like, it's just, Aravaipa does such a wonderful job with their live streams. And because I live local, like, I volunteer for a lot of those events. And so for me, it was just one of those things that it seemed like such an iconic race. It's in my backyard. Like, we take day trips with the Flagstaff. So you get to like see that, basically the entire course off in the distance. And so decided to, pull the trigger and register for it. And had quite the adventure of a training block, I guess, that led up to it. When I decided to, right after I decided to run it, they announced the 125. So I did decide to run Sedona Canyons. Just after Sedona Canyons, I ended up having some surgery. I had a mass removed from my right breast. And basically, like, my journey then kind of took a side diversion, I guess you could call it. And so the training block never looked like it was supposed to. Unfortunately, everything came back clear, but I had some like post-surgical complications and ran a 50K with like literally like a tube hanging out like from my surgery. I ran the Y East Wonder like a month later because my doctor said I could in the training block. And it was just this amazing adventure, just a way to kind of like push myself through a training block. I think training blocks are really the fun that leads up to the race. They're the things that make you who you are. But was just so excited to toe that line at Cocodona. I had some coaching and kind of stuck to it. It was just one of those, we dealt with my health issues over the course of that training block. And unfortunately, I had my husband by my side. A friend of ours decided to jump in and crew for the entire race. So between my husband and my friend David, they were literally with me every step of the way. Between the two of them, they jumped in. I think each of them paced me like 60 miles of the event. And then I was fortunate enough to have two other friends jump in and pace me for two other segments as well. So for the most part, when I could have a pacer for the event, I did have someone alongside of me, with the exception of one block in the middle of it that I guess like we can kind of talk about like the whole journey, where I really just decided I needed a break and I had to get my head right and be alone in order to figure that out. So race day, so Cocodona is just really one of those like beautiful races. I think when we all hear about Cocodona, everybody talks about that first crazy climb, getting up into Crown King. And that climb is everything that everyone says it is. It's hard and it's exposed. But I had done it as a training run. Like they have a race or they have a run about a month before. And so I was able to do that. And I met a bunch of really great people during that training run and was able to kind of start with them during that race. And so it was everything that it was supposed to be. It was hard. It was brutal. But really, like after that, like the race was so much more than what I ever expected to be. By the time I got into Crown King, I had already just started to get some blisters in spots that I had never gotten blisters before. And so for me, like that was one of the things that I had to contend with pretty much from the mile 40 or so on. And it was just, they were in a spot that I wasn't used to getting them. Typically as a runner, I'll get blisters on the sides of my feet. I got them in the pads of my feet. And needless to say, like by the end of Cocodona, like I pretty much lost the entire bottoms of my feet,
Oh, wow.
which was really, really, really challenging. But most people don't talk about that climb after you leave, or like after you leave Crown King. And it was so hard. Like it was probably the second hardest part of their actual race, because you're alone and you're in the dark and you're tired because it's like the first night you've just done this crazy, crazy climb. Um, and you don't get to see your crew until like pretty much you get into Prescott. So got into Prescott, ended up seeing my husband, took care of my feet, and then off we kind of went on that journey, I guess, for lack of a better word. And I just continued to deal with those blisters, which I think was the hardest part for me. Since I've ran Sedona Canyons, like obviously I got into Jerome, and was always already at a point where I was in more physical pain than I think I've ever been in. And I was looking at like my husband and my crew, and I was like, I still have halfway to go. Like, how am I going to do this? But I think when you set out to, when you set a goal for any race, whether it's Cocodona, whether it's your first 100, whether it's, a half marathon, like you have to know your why, and you have to know what you're willing to do in order to get to that finish line. After I got into Jerome, I knew what was ahead of me since I'd already run it before. And when I went to leave Jerome, I told my crew, like, I need to take this next segment and do it alone because I needed to get my head right. Because I was just in really one of those just tough spots. Like, how am I going to push through another 125 miles? Like, my feet are falling apart. Like, I can barely walk. And I think we all see that, right? You see the stories, you hear people talk about blisters, and you know that it's going to happen, but you just hope it's not going to happen to you. And it happened to me in a way that I would have never imagined it would have. Like, I've trained for how do I deal with them when I get them on the sides of my feet or on my heels, but that's not where they were at. By the time I got into Deer Pass, which is the aid station right before you would head into Sedona, I was probably at my lowest part. At that point, I still hadn't really slept. I'd slept about 45 minutes at that point. I think sleep is one of those things that is always the eluding factor in a big race like that. And had my first meltdown. I looked at my husband, and then I just cried because I was like, I don't know that I can finish this race, and I want it more than anything. And I think that's probably some of the stuff that you saw as he was sharing on social. And we decided I was going to try to take a 2-hour nap, just because I hadn't slept yet and trying to get me through that pain. And unfortunately, we slept a little too long. Woke up an hour later than we intended, and literally like scrambled to get out. And I don't want to say we were chasing cutoffs, because I probably at that point was probably still 10 hours ahead of the cutoff. So it wasn't really like feeling like that I was chasing, but I knew if my feet had continued to kind of deteriorate, that I wasn't sure how much faster I was going to be. But the Air Bike community is amazing. So I volunteered a bunch of times, and Jen was at the Sedona Canyons, or the Sedona aid station, and she sent me a text and said, "You're only 2 miles away." And like, you get like that huge burst of energy. Like you've got these people that are cheering for you. So made it into Sedona, made the grueling climb out of Kasner Canyon, and then had another meltdown at the top. Literally like cried my eyes out when I got to the top and was like, I don't know that I can do this. And trail angels, right? We talk about this amazing runner that I had met earlier in the night. Anna runs up and she like, "What's wrong? Like, stop crying. You've got this." And she hands me like orange juice, and she's like, "Drink this." So drink some orange juice. Orange juice during an ultra is like rocket fuel. I was like,
I'll have to try that. Yeah. Orange juice.
And so it's just, kind of kept going. I ran the race before, so kind of knew everything that was going. Just had an amazing, they had a controlled burn in Flagstaff. My friend Jackie had jumped in to pace me for the section out of Fort Tuthill, or from Munns Park into Fort Tuthill, so 20 miles. Jackie's one of those runners that to me is one of my inspirations, and so it was amazing to have her along with me, and probably another like one of those really, really low points. But we got through, like choking through like the grossness of like the smoke, getting to Walnut Canyon, which is literally your last aid station before you finally make that climb up Eldon. And at that point, I was just ready to be done. It's like, it's 22 miles to the finish. What like I knew what the Eldon climb was going to be like, but it was just really, really funny. Like, it's like, how am I going to make it up that mountain? And at that point, I was just so ready to be done. And I was like, I tell my pacer, David, I was like, we're going to get in. We're going to like make sure my feet are okay. And we're like, going to go. And so I think there were literally sections on the climb up Eldon that I was literally like crawling because I was so tired. At that point, I'd slept, I think, 5.5 hours total. And I was like, my feet hurt. My legs hurt. This is evil. Why do they make you climb 200 feet over 2.5 miles, less than 10 miles before the finish? But we get to the top, and for anyone that runs or just wants to run Cocodona, like literally, it's like the best like aid station 8 miles before the finish. Like Pete Mortimer like cooks all the meats, and there's all kinds of fun. Like, don't sit down and stay like I did. Like, literally, like we sat and we had the most amazing food, and we like chugged a beer together, and then off we went 8 miles to the finish line. And finished somewhere around like 3:00 in the morning. I finished in, I think, just 1:18:12, I think was what my finish time was. So there's 125 hours to finish Cocodona. So I truly like embraced the entire Cocodona experience. But it's such a beautiful and amazing race. And so anyone that's looking for like a really fun challenge and just wants to go out there and experience Arizona for everything that it can offer, like just do it. And don't wait, because like literally now, like I think the race sold out for next year within like 2 weeks.
Oh wow. I think you're certainly not hurting my curiosity with it. Like now I really want to do it. So it's like, oh wow, it's like you said, it's like, wow, that sounds really intense, but it's like, oh wow, I kind of want to take the plunge. Oh yeah, Jason B says he had vegan bratwurst and chocolate cake that aid station. That sounds kind of amazing, actually. So two things I want to ask. First, how are you dealing with your feet? Because you said the whole bottom of your foot was coming off. What were you doing? Like just taking it, or?
They are doing much better. Like it probably took about a month and a half before my feet had kind of healed. During my training block, like I had done a bunch of races to kind of just build up to Cocodona. I had signed up to run a cold water, which takes place in January. And during that race, I'd had an intense amount of foot pain and decided to drop right around the 100K mark. Had saw a doctor just after that and was then diagnosed with a condition in my feet, the sesamoids. So it's like the bones that are on like the side of like the joint that in your toes. Apparently mine have never like fused properly. So I didn't actually re-break my foot like I had done, after the 50 miler. And so basically my doctor was like, well, we can do one of two things. Like when you have sesamoiditis, it's inflammation. Your feet are always going to hurt. He's like, but you're a runner and I'm not going to tell you not to run. So we can, try some orthotics. We can try a cortisone shot every once in a while. And that's what we can do to kind of like help combat that. So I think for me, like the hardest part post Cocodona was allowing my feet to heal because of those where I'd gotten the injection. Basically that entire part of my foot, the middle was missing. And then I'd also gotten some very like bad blisters on the side where they'd given me my injection, because obviously the injection adds more fluid into your skin. So I think for me, like if I ever decide to go that route again, I'll space it out a little bit like farther from actual race day. They're finally getting back to looking like normal feet again. If any trail runner can say that they have that look normal.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't run 200 miles, and sometimes I'm just like, are these really my feet now? Like, is this my new normal? I guess. But
I haven't gone for a pedicure since I've started running. Like, people look at your feet and they're like, "Oh my God, wait, what?" Not going to be a foot model for sure, but lost a couple of toenails. I think that's pretty normal. But I think we learn, like, we lose those when you run a 50K, a 50 mile, or a marathon, whatever. So overall, my feet are feeling good. I'll have to figure out what that looks like as I continue to try to build up mileage again. Because I don't know what that's going to look like. I haven't recovered very well, I guess, for lack of a better word. Cocodona, for lack of a better word, like, I finished and I felt broken. I think I shared a little of that when I was on the My First Ultra podcast with Chris and Carly. They had kind of said, hey, like, they reached out and said, hey, will you come on and talk to us about Cocodona? And at first I told Chris no. And I said, nah, I'm really in a bad headspace. I'm not sure that I'm ready to come and share. But because of the amount of pain that I had actually had to, like, push through in order to find that finish line, I really had just kind of disconnected mentally. And so it was really, really, I think for me, like, it wasn't Cocodona and, like, recovering from it really wasn't my feet that I had to recover from. It was figuring out where I was at from a mental headspace, and how to navigate through that new chapter. I think plenty of us, like, we do these hard things or we set these big goals and you finish that epic event and you feel a little lost, right? Like, you get that little bit of, like, depression. You're like, what's next? And this was very, very different for me. When I talked with Chris and Carly, I told them, I've got a therapy session set up next week. And it just happened to be, like, mental health month that month. And so it was just really kind of a great way to kind of advocate for just mental health. If you feel like you're in a weird spot and it doesn't feel like the normal post-race blues, seek a little bit of help. I felt empty, like, when I was done. Like, people would be like, oh my God, you just did this cool epic thing. And I'd be like, yay. Sure, I ran 250 miles. And so, like, when you're just like, yeah, like, that's not normal. So I kind of talked to a therapist and kind of worked through what that was going to look like for me. And so figuring out how to navigate what that looked like for me post Cocodona is kind of where I'm at now, and just kind of figuring out what's next. And I'm back to figuring out, like, finding that joy of running again. Cocodona was everything that I wanted it to be. And just kind of threw me for a curveball. Because for me, like, I told my crew, like, I want that finish line more than I want anything else. And I didn't care whether I was going to have to crawl to get there. Like, I was going to keep moving until I missed a cutoff. And I couldn't move anymore. It didn't matter whether something was broken and I was bleeding or whatever the case may be. I wanted that finish line more than anything else. But unfortunately, like, in order to get there, I put up a wall where I disconnected mentally and really stayed pretty disconnected even from my friends and family for probably about a month after that. So I think I haven't really shared that in a public forum as of yet. And I think it's important to share because I can't imagine that I'm the only one that's gone through that. But it's fun, right? Like, we love doing these hard things. And now as I look forward, because typically everybody's like, okay, like, they were used to it with me. Ran a 50K, ran a 50 miler, ran a 100 miler, ran 125, ran 250. What's next? And what's next looks a little different for me now. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be some big, huge, crazy, scary goal. It can just about being happy.
Yeah, I absolutely. Well, something you said on Chris and Carly's podcast and just now resonated with me, because I suffer from the same thing. It's like during, like, the training, like the event, I kind of, like, dissociate from what's happening. And that was kind of something that I used as, like, a tool in, previously growing up to, like, escape traumas and stuff. So whenever I'm actually done with, like, a training cycle, like an ultra, it's like, well, now I have to, like, feel stuff. So it's like I'm, like, usually post ultra, like, I'm kind of, like, dealing with my feelings, and like same thing, I get like a kind of paraphrasing what you said on their podcast. You're just kind of like having to actually take some of that stuff on, right? Like you're having to kind of feel it and work through it. So um, I did resonate with what you said, and thank you for sharing that here too. Um, that what you said is very helpful, and it made it certainly landed with me when you talked about it in Chris and Carly's podcast too. So thank you for sharing that. Um, Something that you said earlier, you're talking about like you're going through like lows, and like you're talking about like having to crawl, like uh, and you said something about you have to really know what your why is. So Cocodona, not just Cocodona, any race you've done, obviously you're probably pretty well tapped into what your why is. Like, so what do you think your why is for completing like a Cocodona, or or Sedona 125, or so what's your why? I guess we'll start there.
I think whys are something that are always ever evolving. Um, I think when I first started out running and I started this whole like, okay, did this, what's next? Um, I think I always just wanted to see like what my limits were. And so my whys have typically been very self-centered, I guess. Like I wasn't running for a purpose. I wasn't running for a cause. I was just really trying to see my human limitations and what I could push myself to. I come from like a background of trauma, and so like anytime things have gotten hard, I've kind of always looked at it like you've survived this, and so you can get through anything that you set your goal on. But I think sometimes like your why has to be deeper than that, and you truly have to like get real with yourself and kind of figure out what those limits are. I think I discovered that during Cocodona. And I think moving forward, like my why is ever evolving. I think my why next, when I figure out, or as I'm figuring out what the next chapter is, it's truly ensuring that I'm doing things that bring me joy and make me happy. And that's not to say that the Cocodona experience wasn't like the best epic thing ever, because it was. And it was everything that I wanted it to be and more. But just making sure that when we continue to do these hard things, that we're doing them for the right reason, and making sure that we maintain like positivity and mental health and physical health and all of that other stuff, right? You've got one body. Like you want to be able to continue to do these big, huge, epic adventures. So if I figure out what it is, maybe you'll have to have me back on and we can talk about it then. Because right now I need to figure out a new one.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I agree with that, because I think I try to think about what my why is, and it's like I don't know if I can really put like a pin in like one thing. It's like it might be different tomorrow. Like I agree. It's like I'm kind of like maybe it is for like my own like selfish reasons or whatever. It's like I want to see what I'm capable of. There's like it's not static, right? So I absolutely agree with what you just said. So maybe if we figure it out, we'll have to have a recap and be like, hey, we know what our why is now. Maybe for now, yay, yeah. So that resonates with me, because I mean, right now my why is a number of different things, right? And it could be a different thing in a month. So yeah, I agree with that.
I think my why right now is to have fun.
Just have fun. I think that's like a great goal, right? It's like if you're not having fun, then what's the point? I mean, there is like ultras, there's some suffering and like self-discovery, and all that. But I mean, you have to have fun too. It's not all fun, but I mean, you have to have some fun. But so you're talking about going through what? How many nights did you run through then? 2 or 3 nights? Four
Monday,
nights?
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 4 nights.
Okay.
And well, technically through Friday night, because I finished technically Saturday morning at like 3 o'clock in the morning. So 5.
How much sleep did you get through those days?
5.5 total, I
Five
think,
and
is what we totaled
five
it
and a
up
half
to.
hours. Wow. So hallucinations? Did you have any?
So those are, I mean, I guess like I've always thought of hallucinations as like things that like are really not there, but you think that they're there. Um, and I saw things, but I knew that they weren't really there. So but like when I ran, it was funny. So this is actually kind of silly. So during Sedona Canyons, when you get up into Flagstaff, like there's like logs all around from like prior fires. And during Sedona Canyons, the logs looked like alligators. You're in Flagstaff. There's not alligators in the middle of the forest. So like you'd see a burnt log and I'd jump and be like, oh, alligator. The alligators came back to hang out during Cocodona. They were back in full force. They were all over the trails. But hippos came back to join them. And not like big, huge hippos like you see at the zoo, but like the cartoon kind of like fluffy, like hippos were occasionally on the trail. But it was like, I knew that those weren't really there. When Jackie and I were coming out of like the burn area, the sun was just about to come up as we were getting into Fort Tuthill, and you like are looking through like the haze and the sun is coming up. And I kid you not, like, I think back to like the early 80s and like the Marlboro like smoking commercials and like the guys leaned up against the tree, but instead of him smoking like cowboy hat and all, and he's got like a heart like band on his head. I don't know what it says, but he's just like leaning against a tree. And I was like, wait, that guy's not really there. And Jackie's like, what? And I was like, yeah. So it was like, I guess those were the only like fun. I didn't, hallucinations. I didn't have any. I wasn't like talking to anyone or anything else like that. I think I was always cognizant enough to know like, okay, that's not really there. Just my eyes playing tricks on me for a brief moment because I'm tired. It's always weird what like your brain puts together. I think there were like eyes and flowers occasionally, like my own Alice in Wonderland experience, but nothing super crazy, I guess. Hippos and alligators are kind of crazy.
Half the cast of Madagascar and the Marlboro Man. And so you shared yours. I'll share mine. I had my first hallucination at 100K. So I get mine early, I guess. But I did a 7:00 start time 100K this last June, and I didn't really sleep leading up. I had to go to work and get my stuff ready and go to this thing, and I lost part of, I had a belt light and a headlamp, and I lost my belt light at like 2 a.m. So all I had was just this like yellow hued headlamp. And I lost like all my depth perception. And I was like kind of falling asleep while I was running and like tripping on roots. And I could have swore I saw the Goins fishermen hugging like a big oak tree. So, and I couldn't tell that's when I had Goins fish sticks or even had fish sticks. So I wanted to share mine since you shared yours. So like I knew it wasn't real. Like immediately I was like, wait, that's not happening. But so yeah. Thanks for sharing.
That makes like a fantastic podcast. Like I know like this channel's got a bunch of those like fun other things. Like right now I'm loving your guys's like the music to listen to. Maybe you guys should like throw on an episode where everybody like sends in all of their fun hallucinations.
I think you're onto something. That sounds like a really good idea. Because I hear so many really, really good hallucination stories. So yeah, maybe we'll have to have you pilot that one. But that's a great idea.
I'm in.
That's great. That's great. So I think you kind of touched on. I have to ask a few more Cocodona questions. I'm sorry. It got me. The story was fantastic. I think you kind of touched on like your lows at Cocodona, but was there ever like a moment where you're like, I don't think I'm gonna make it? Like, was there ever that time? Did you ever like have that like at any point in time?
Heading into Deer Pass. Deer Pass is the aid station right before Sedona, and like at that point I hadn't really slept. I was struggling just to move through that section. I tried to like take a quick little like trail nap because I was literally like falling asleep as I was trying to move. And my feet were like bothering me. And so I think it was just like cumulative fatigue. And that was really where like I had my first real cry because I wanted that finish so badly. And so I really thought at that point I wasn't sure if I could make it. And then I had another moment when I coming in through Walnut Canyon, like right before you get into that aid station, my husband was pacing me through that section. And we're in the middle of the climb and I was just absolutely spent. And I was really struggling with moving because the amount of pain that I was in. Sorry, like I feel like kind of some of the emotions like come back from it, and it's 5 months, 3 months ago, or whatever it was. And I sat down and I told him like I needed a minute, and at that point I'm a marathon away from the finish line, but I know everything that's coming next, and I wasn't sure that I could continue to like move. Like it was just, how do I continue to like push through this sheer amount of pain? And so I think there I had doubts. I wasn't sure whether, you think about it, like you've already gone 225 miles. How do you not go 25 more? And that was really where I just kind of had to like dig deep. And he gave me my moment. I think that was probably like post Cocodona, going back and reading the way that my husband had shared the journey, was probably one of the most beautiful posts that I think I've ever read. It was raw, and I could see how much pain my husband was going through by having to watch me struggle. I think that's sometimes one of the things that is maybe the unspoken thing that we don't talk about. We talk about all of us coming up, we're doing these crazy goals, but they also impact our support crew. And so it was definitely the section I think that was hard. Like I had 2 moments that I wasn't sure if I could finish. I was worried about missing cutoffs as I was getting into certain sections. But I was determined to try to get that finish no matter what. And so I was going to keep moving until I missed a cutoff and they told me I couldn't move any farther.
So on the other side of that, first of all, you have a great cheerleader with your husband. Like, it's got to be pretty rad. So shout out to David. So on the other side of that, when was the moment when you were just like, okay, I've got this. Like this is going to happen. Like, yeah,
the start line.
The start line. I love that.
I don't even know, like, and really like the start line, and then like there's so much. It really is just so much fun. Like it's hard, and you have all these self-doubts while you're doing it, but like the course is just beautiful, and you start in the low desert and you end up in the mountains, and then you're back down into the valleys, and you get to cross Oak Creek and like this ice cold water before you climb back up Casner Canyon, and you have the beautiful views of Sedona. It's really just a magical course. And so I think like if anyone's looking for just a magical adventure, it's really like the best thing to do. I'm a huge like, go run Cocodona. Like you could totally do this. Or if you're not ready for the full like 250 experience, sign up for Sedona Canyons, because it's exactly the same sort of thing. You just get to skip the really hard climb at the beginning.
Yeah, I've gotten a chance to come out to Arizona 3 or 4 times, and I've always loved. I didn't run out there; it was before I was into running, but I've always loved it out there. So, yeah, I think you've got me for sure. So I know you said you don't really. Maybe you mentioned you don't really know like what's next, but what is next? Like just enjoying kind of like the completion of Cocodona, or do you have like anything else on your radar coming up, or
I do.
You do? Oh, nice.
I do.
Cool.
So post Cocodona, obviously I worked on kind of dealing with some of those mental health issues that I was having post race. And the therapist that I was seeing kind of challenged me to like get back to my roots and remember why I started running to begin with. And like I made a commitment that I was not going to like impulsively like sign up for a race. And it's really, really hard, right? Because you see all your friends or like you see people that you ran with during Cocodona, and like they're out doing epic adventures, and you're like, wait, why am I just sitting on the couch? But I really, really enjoyed kind of taking that break. A couple, I guess maybe like a month and a half after Cocodona, I went and bought a gravel bike and decided I was going to like try to ride. So I have a fun Fun ride coming up at the end of September. I'm going to do the Chino Grinder. So it's a gravel bike race here in Arizona. I think it's like the longest running gravel bike race that there is. Contrary to what most of my friends had said, they were like, wait, are you doing the 100-miler? And I was like, no, just doing the 21-mile fun ride, which I guess in biking is the equivalent of like running the 5K. I don't know, but I'm going to do that for fun. I've started kind of like swimming in the middle of it just as a cross training activity. I was kind of trying to figure out what's next, and one of like my dream races is to do Badwater. I live in Arizona, so I get to train in the heat. I think that's a goal I've always had, and it's something that I still want to do, but I still need to get 2 more 100-milers underneath my belt before I can even apply. So I can't I'm putting this out in the space. Right now I registered for the lottery for AC 100.
Cool.
That lottery is next week. I also will obviously take my Cocodona and Javelina lottery tickets and drop them in for Western States, because those are obviously it's an iconic race that I think most of us who have enjoyed trail running actually want to run. So those are currently the 2 races that I think hopefully I get into one. Hopefully not both, like because they're only a week apart, and I don't know that I'm ready to like run 200s back to back. But I think if anyone was gonna like try to do it, it would probably be me, because it'd just be the new like, what's next for Jen? What craziness is she doing next? She's gonna try to run 2 really hard hundreds back to back. But I don't think I'm that lucky. So, but those are kind of the things that I already have scheduled. I'm going to run Across the Years, which is another Aravaipa race.
Yeah.
Going into the new year, I signed up for the 48-hour, which should be fun. I've done a 6,
cool.
a 12, and a 24-hour timed race. When I ran the 24-hour time race, I was miserable and said I would never do one ever again. So I'm not quite sure, but I promised like I was going to do something fun, and it seems like a fun way to kind of push myself to a limit again, but also I can run 1 lap or I can run 150. Like, we'll see. So,
yeah.
And if I don't get in either of those 2 races, one's in July, I think one's in the last week in July, one's in the first week in August. I'm debating whether I want to sign up for either the Mogollon Monster or the Tunnel Hill 100. So I just need to figure out whether I want to do some mountain climbing or fast and flat. So
wow.
Fun things to come. And then I think the 2024 right now. So 2026, because I'm kind of enjoying this whole like bike and swimming cross training. I think a friend of mine and I are going to maybe try to do a half Ironman in like Hawaii for my 45th birthday. So more to come of crazy adventures in the life of Jennifer Goins, right?
That sounds amazing. Tunnel Hill was, I almost signed up for that for my first 100, but it's always been on my radar. And I've been wanting to like dabble in gravel bike racing too. So it'd be kind of cool to see, maybe I can kind of see what you're up to and see how much fun it looks. Maybe that'll help sway my decision. I like cycling too. So gravel bike's been kind of been something I've been kind of lurking mostly on social media, but I think I want to also give that a try too. That's awesome. Across the Years, Om Gandhi, the co-host of Watching Your Buds, he did it last year, so that's cool. He said it was really, really fun, and I like loop courses too. I've done some 24-hour stuff, and that'll be fun too. Yeah,
that
cool.
was your last race a couple of weekends ago, right?
I did it. Well, I did a backyard, and then before that was the 24-hour. But it was weird. It's hard. It's like you said, it's like you're kind of left to your own devices on how many loops you want to do. So it's something else, right? So cool. I guess I have a question, maybe for me, because I'm, like I said, 200 miles has been something I've been kind of watching. Anybody else that's 200-mile curious? Like, do you have any advice other than maybe just go, right? Maybe advice for me or anybody else that wants to do 200 milers, because I'd like to hear that.
Well, my advice is really going to be, if you are thinking about it and you're curious, like literally, like just go.
Just sign up, right?
Really, like rip off the Band-Aid, sign up to do it. Make sure you put in the work, right? You can't show up on the start line and be like, hey, I'm here, let me run 200 miles. But it's such a different experience. I think like when I first got into like road running, like I thought like I had to do a gazillion 5Ks and then I had to do a gazillion like half marathons before I could try another distance. And I've really found that like in ultra running, they're all so different, right? Like you could run a trail half marathon and it takes you like the same amount of time that like you would have normally like you could, I don't even know, like it's takes you considerably longer. Like you're like, wait a minute, I could have done like 3 half marathons in the time that it just took me to do this one. So I would say like just put some work in, like go out and with the only intention of having fun. Like that really was like my Cocodona journey. It was really about having fun and just exploring all of the beautiful things. For me, my experience in the 200 distance compared to even like the 50 miler, 50K, 100 miler is that it really is just a different animal. I'm not an elite runner. I'm a back of the packer. And so the 250 experience was a lot of like running and hiking and walking and some thoughts about like rolling around on the ground and like crawling. Fortunately, like it really never got that bad. But you just have to want to like just go and complete the distance and have fun doing it. Because it's really about the adventure, right? Like we just want to do cool shit and like you get to do that in trail running. Like you get to explore places that you wouldn't normally get to do on foot. And these races are a great way to do that. They're supported. There's a great community. So you always feel supported out there. So if you're thinking about it, you're even curious about it, like find one that brings your heart joy, like something that like sparks like oh, I'd love to go and explore this area of the country, but I don't really have the time to take a week and go hiking all by myself. Like find a race, sign up, go do it with like 100 or 1,000 of your new trail friends because it's going to be an epic adventure.
I love that. That's great. Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to. I don't know which one to do yet. I guess maybe I'll have to come out to Arizona. I don't know, somewhere out west. So a couple questions, I guess, to wrap this up. Well, okay, we briefly talked earlier today in direct message form about music, and I think I sent you the playlist, the link to the playlist. So whether or not you listen to music while you're running, what are you listening to? What's in your earbuds?
Currently, or when I run, right now it's been everything. But if normal, like training run, I typically have some sort of true crime podcast going on in my ears.
Nice.
Dateline NBC and I have like some sort of like, I know it's supposed to be like a visual thing because you're normally watching it on TV, but that's typically what I'm listening to. I typically don't listen to music during a race, but love to listen to random podcasts and music while like I'm out on a training run. I'm looking forward to listening to the one that you sent over that's, from the podcast because it should be fun. Like my friend Jessica, who's an amazing runner, like created this ginormous playlist for me for Cocodona. And unfortunately, like I didn't typically have my earbuds in. So like currently I'm working my way through like the 20 some odd hours worth of music that she had pre-programmed for me. But I'm a lover of everything. So I've been enjoying like catching up on all of the different podcasts that are out there. But just having fun. Everything's in my ears these days.
Cool. Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's any genre off limits for me. I'm just like, whatever. Like whenever something new pops up, it's always kind of like to entertain new acts and new genres and cool.
Disney songs are great for a while out on the trail. And tunes, like
I love
as
that.
a mom and like a grandma to like little kids, like those are fun things to just belt on and have fun. Just remember you gotta always laugh at yourself. So when you find yourself in a low moment out on the trail, find your jam and just sing and everybody will enjoy it along with you.
Agree. Yeah. I'll have to throw some Disney songs on the playlist, the community playlist. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a delight getting to know you through social media and also this chat. I'll have to have you back on. I feel like I've got more questions after these questions, but I can't take up your entire evening. So I thank you so much for coming on, sharing your story. I loved, watching your story on Facebook, like I said before, and I can't wait to see what's coming next for you. It's going to be super exciting. So if you had any closing advice or anything you'd like to leave with our audience, I would like to give you that chance. Not to put you in the spot, but
Yeah, I know, right? I really appreciate you having me on. It's odd to be asked to come on and kind of share your story. Like, I really do feel like I'm just a normal runner, right? I'm an everyday ultra, right? Like everyday runner podcast. And so it's just, for me, I'm grateful to be asked to be here, share my story. Like, hopefully it resonates with someone. And if they're struggling in any way, like, they know that they're not alone. I also always want to just convey the message to just continue to dream big. Like, I have a mantra that, if it doesn't scare you, you're not dreaming big enough. My running mantra while I'm out on the trail is forward is a pace. I have it tattooed on my arm. So in the event that I ever forget while I'm running, you're worried about being slow, especially those of us that are making the transition from road to trail. Just keep moving. It's applicable in everyday life, and just find a big goal, go after it, and you can do it. So
I love that. Forward is a pace. Yeah, I love that. That's great. Well, Jen, like I said, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you so much for tuning in. If you're here,
yeah,
like I said, feel free to share this podcast, rate, review. Check out Jennifer Goins on Instagram if you want. I assure you, you will leave with lots of inspiration. Her story is amazing. You're a badass. You're like so. I am so honored that you were on here chatting with us, and thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. And have a wonderful evening.
thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.